कसरी नालन्दा चलिरहेको थियो, कसरी टिबेटनहरू चाइनिजहरू पढ्नु आइरहेको थियो,
then how would Nalanda still be operating when Bhaktiyar Khilji attacked the Magad area of India in the 13th century? How were the Tibetans and Chinese still coming there to study? Why would they go there if nothing was remaining because all the Buddhists had become Hindus? But they were still going there. Bhaktiyar Khilji, who was supported by Hindu kings, was mistaken in his understanding and thought that these large Mahaviharas, or great monastic centers of learning that were all over North India, such as Vallabhi in Gujarat and Sompuri in Sompur in Bangladesh, to be military camps. He was wrongly informed that the monks, who were all dressed the same, were actually armies, and he thought that if he could destroy them, then he could take over India, and this is why he attacked. And the biggest blow in their attack happened to Buddhadharma. They did also kill Hindus and they killed Jains as well, but the manner in which Buddhists stayed together in such centers was not done a lot by the Jains. And Hindus had gurukuls, or small schools in the Guru's house, at each village, and not such large centers. There was one learning center called Takshashila, but here Buddhists, Hindus and Jains were all taught, and not just Hindus. Thus, when we look at how Buddhism deteriorated and disappeared, it was not because it was destroyed by Shankaracharya. Because the 13th century is, counting from the 8th century, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, that is 500 years later. Bhaktiyar Khilji has written about destroying Nalanda in his own diary.
त्यसमा नालन्दको उपाध्याय पाली भाषामा उपजया हैन.
At that time, the Upadhyaya or Dean or Upajaya in Pali and Khenpo in Tibetan was a Kashmiri Brahmin named Shakyashree Bhadra. Now Brahmin here does not mean Hindu. His family lineage was Brahmin, but he was a Buddhist master. He had left Hindu dharma and the caste system. He escaped from Nalanda, and looking at it burning from afar, he wept. And weeping he said, "Now Buddhadharma has gone from the Indian subcontinent." He then came to Nepal and went to Tibet from here. He passed away in Tibet. In Tibet, in the Sakya tradition, there is a great famous scholar and guru known as Sakya Pandit. It was Shakyashree Bhadra who conferred upon him the title of Pandit.
पहिलो कर्मपा दुसुङ खेम्पा लाई कर्मपा भन्ने टाइटल दिने पनि उहाँ नै हो.
And he also gave the title of Karmapa to the first Karmapa, Dusung Khenpa, of the Kagyupa and the Karma Kagyu tradition of Tibet. And now, currently, we have the 17th Karmapa. There is a story about Sakya Pandit that someone called Shankaracharya Haribhadra went from here, Kathmandu, to Rasua and debated with him there. And this probably is the same Shankaracharya that the Newar story talks about, the one who destroyed many things here. Rasua is called Kirong on the Tibetan side, and here on the Nepal side we call it Rasua district. The debate occurred in the Sanskrit language at that border. And Sakya Pandit defeated that Shankaracharya, and subsequently, when returning to Tibet, he wanted to take him back with him. And since this Shankaracharya had lost the debate, he had to go along. And so he went with Sakya Pandit to Tibet.
गुरु पद्मसम्भवले अगाडि दिएको 12 तेन्माहरू जसलाई आदेश दिनुभएको थियो कि अबौद्धहरू कसलाई पनि त्यहाँ भित्र पस्न नदिनु.
But Guru Padmasambhava had previously ordered the 12 Tenma goddesses to not allow non-Buddhists into Tibet. And it is said that when the Shankaracharya Haribhadra entered Tibet, the 12 Tenma goddesses killed him. So this might be what is referred to in the stories in some places that say that Shankaracharya died in Tibet. But this is just a guess, since it is not 100% certain that this Haribhadra was the same Shankaracharya who came to Nepal or not. But when considering the time period, if this Shankaracharya could come to Nepal and defeat those who were the forefathers of the current Newars of Nepal, which included Siddhas or adepts and Pandits or learned persons, it would seem to be that Buddhadharma had already declined quite a bit in Nepal at that time. And that would be around the 12th century, when the king Jayasthiti Malla forced all the Newar monks to marry. Although the name Newar was not used at the time, as it was the name actually given by the Mallas, still they were the ancestors of the present-day Newars. So the monks were forced to marry, and a caste system was established according to the Manusmriti, a Hindu legal text. Vajracharya thus became akin to Brahmins, Shakyas to Kshatriyas, etc. They brought in all this, including the untouchable caste, none of which exists in the Buddhadharma. And also texts were burned and destroyed, many pujas or rituals were stopped, and learning centers were closed. Thus they were weakened from all this. And only because they were weakened would it have been possible for that Shankaracharya to have come and defeated them. Before all this happened, at the time when gurus like Marpa had come, or the disciples of Naropa like Vagisvarkirti had come, Buddhadharma was still flourishing. Thus, this refers to a much later Shankaracharya, not Adi Shankaracharya.
तर आदि शङ्कराचार्यमा जाउँ, प्रश्नमा त आदि शङ्कराचार्य हो, त के उहाँले सबैतिर जित्दै बौद्धहरूलाई जित्दै गएर.
So let us move on to Adi Shankaracharya, as the question is about Adi Shankaracharya. Did he defeat Buddhists from all over and thus eliminate Buddhadharma from the Indian subcontinent or South Asia? No. In Afghanistan, in the Pakistan area, in Iran, in Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, etc., it disappeared because of the Islamic invasion. And this had started before the time of Shankaracharya. Muslims had started occupying these places from before. It had already begun before. Then they advanced inwards. Unfortunately, when they came to India, many Hindu kings, instead of helping protect against the Muslims, actually helped them. Bengal used to be ruled by kings of the Pal dynasty who were Buddhists. They were pure Vajrayana Buddhist practitioners. The kingdom of the Pal dynasty was a great kingdom. So how did the Muslims manage to destroy them? The Sen kingdom was located between them and the Muslims. And to get to Bengal, the Muslims needed to go through a narrow corridor through the Sen kingdom. If the Sen kings had wanted to, then they could have stopped them. Or, if the Sen and Pal kingdoms had joined forces and fought together, they could have stopped them. But since the Pal kingdom was Buddhist, the Sen king let the Muslims go through. And thus the Muslims defeated the Pal kingdom, and the Pal kings then went north towards the Assam area and established what is called the Second Pal dynasty. And it was after this that the place Kamarup Kamakhya in Assam became a Buddhist power spot. But the same Muslims also ultimately defeated the Sen kings after they had weakened the Pal kingdom, and eventually the later Pal kings were also defeated. This is the reason Bangladesh is Muslim now. They were mostly Buddhist before, but everyone became Muslim afterwards. This is how the Hindu kings helped the Muslims. Why were Buddhists especially targeted? Because at that time, the Jain Dharma was not in a state to compete with Hindu Dharma. They were small in number, and they were just focusing on doing their own meditation and practices and teaching and studying their Dharma. But Buddha Dharma was powerful. It had great kings, and it was widespread. It had expanded all over South Asia. And it also included Brahmins. The Hindu Brahmins were especially angry with those Brahmins that they had become Buddhists in spite of being Brahmin. Although this had been happening since the time of the Buddha, the Hindus from that later time were more outraged by Brahmin Buddhists. That is why it became their goal to cause their downfall in any way possible.
शङ्कराचार्यको नाराय नै वेद जसरी पनि सत्य हो, जेसुकै होस्, हो होइन होइन, वेद ठीक करेक्ट सत्य.
And Shankaracharya's slogan was, the Vedas are true no matter what, regardless of whether they were true or not. He just insisted that they were correct, true, and the words of Ishwar, and thus their refutation is not permitted. Thus he was not seeking the truth. He was not saying, let us examine them to see if they are correct or not. His slogan was simply that they are true. That is why this same Shankaracharya, taking along an army with him, killed non-Hindus. He went about finishing them off, wiping them out. But he had not debated with them. How can this be said? Because he did not know anything about Buddhadharma, so how could he debate with them? And how can it be said that he did not know? Read his commentaries, then you will see for yourself whether he knew Buddhadharma or not. He was the first one to write incorrectly about Buddhadharma. Then Ramanujacharya, Madhavacharya, Bhaskaracharya, Vallabhacharya all copied him. They all have made the same errors. They did not actually study Buddhadharma. And how can anyone refute what one has not studied? To refute something, one has to know the subject well. That is why he did not challenge any Buddhist. Nor did the Buddhists consider him to be that great. None of the scholars, such as from Nalanda and Vikramashil, thought of him as being a great scholar who was defeating them all, as a threat that was looming. We do not find anything like this in the records. That is why this notion that Shankaracharya defeated Buddhists in every direction, and because of that reason Buddhadharma dissipated and eventually got wiped out, is false. But this happened after Bhaktiyar Khilji and others destroyed these great Mahaviharas. I have recounted the story of the Mahaviharas before. I will repeat it here. Just imagine how great the loss was, how vast the destruction was. They took out all the books at Nalanda, the Shastras, Sutras, and Tantras, whatever was there, and burnt them. We can estimate the magnitude of the volumes of these books from the writings of Bhaktiyar Khilji himself. When such a vast quantity of books are burnt, the piles of paper would remain burning red for some time. In this case, those red embers took 6 months to die down. The smoke remained for 9 months, and Bhaktiyar Khilji himself wrote that 90 lakh books, that is 9 million books, including sutras, shastras, and vyakhyas, were burned. This event at Nalanda was recorded because he wrote about it. But this happened in Vikramashil as well. The same thing was done in Vikramashil. In Sompuri as well, which was in Sompur, now called Paharpur in Bangladesh, the same thing happened. And Odantapuri, which the first monastery of Tibet, Samye Gumba, is a replica of, also had the same thing happen. And the same thing happened in Vallabhi of Gujarat as well. They were all destroyed in the same way. Now, Buddhadharma is not based on faith only. Faith is necessary in Buddhadharma as well. Faith is a very important quality. But it is not based on faith alone, like it is in the Hare Ram Hare Krishna tradition, where it is enough to have faith. Faith in Krishna is considered to be enough for one to reach Param Dham, or the celestial abode. In Buddhadharma, it is not believed that faith in anyone can do this. No Devi or Devas or gods and goddesses can do this either. And Ishwar, or the Creator or Supreme God, does not even exist in Buddhadharma, because it is not logical. There is no evidence of it, and there is no logic to support it. All these various devas and devis are not Ishwar. But in Hindu Dharma, Krishna is considered to be Ishwar. Ram is also considered to be Ishwar. And Shiva is also considered to be Ishwar. Shiva himself is actually a Shraman Deva, who was later integrated or assimilated into Hindu Dharma. Rudra and Shiva are not the same, but they were made to be the same. It is Rudra who is in the Vedas, not Shiva. Therefore, when the Mahaviharas were destroyed in this way, there were no gurus left to teach and explain Buddhadharma. The knowledgeable gurus were not there anymore. Large numbers of Buddhists were still alive. Only the viharas were destroyed. It was the monks who were killed, and a lot of them also fled. But there were still many lay Buddhists and patrons remaining. When Nalanda was destroyed, the Pal dynasty was still there. And it was not only the kings who were Buddhists in the Pal kingdom, but all the subjects were also Buddhists. But there was no one left who could teach, no one left who could explain. Consequently, since it ended up being left to only depend on faith, there was then no difference between Hindu Dharma and Buddha Dharma. It was only a difference of chanting Buddha instead of chanting Krishna. Instead of saying Hare Krishna, it would have been saying Buddha, 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 Buddha. But there was no one left to teach even this much. Whereas on the Hindu side, there were teachers who taught about Ram, who taught about Krishna, how to chant and how to do various things. They had teachers. Thus, after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and thus after 5 centuries, everyone became Hindu. Buddha Dharma had reigned in South Asia for 15 or 16 centuries, and even 1,000 years after Shankaracharya, Buddha Dharma still remained. But after 500 years after the destruction of Nalanda, Vikramashil, etc., all signs of it had completely disappeared. Still, we do find stories about how Hindus also coerced and persecuted the Buddhists. During the time of the British rule, when the British started collecting demographic data, there was a sect in Orissa called the Mahim, who declared themselves to be Buddhists. And when the British administrators asked them why they were declaring themselves to be Buddhists, when in the past they had said they were Hindus, they replied, "If we had declared ourselves to be Buddhists in the past, we would have been destroyed by now. Therefore, to save ourselves, we acted like Hindus. We pretended and called ourselves Hindu. But in fact, we are Buddhists." Thus, some groups like the Mahim still remained. But we can see from their story that Hindus had persecuted, coerced, and tormented Buddhists. That is why they had to hide their identity until the time of the British rule. They told the British, since now it is your rule, they cannot persecute us anymore. So we can now say that we are Buddhist. And so we can tell from these stories that Buddha Dharma did not disappear because Shankaracharya went around obtaining victories in his Digvijay.
Etat sadhana punyena sarve sarvagita padam prapnuvantu jayantu ja kushalam karma vairiram janma mrityu jara vyadi swarupa vartapuritvat mojayama savasatvan durgamat bhavasagara.